Today, our group would like to talk about learning negotiation from history. Our group members are 曼潇、周南旭、米元瑶、辛路宇、姚周、尹印章. We've divided our presentation into 5 parts. So the first part is book introduction. What is the book about? Diplomacy and history should be seen as facts. Their intricate relationship should make them natural part, opening a mutually beneficial path the two social actors that make up this series. The policymakers responsible for shaping the international order, and the historians who provide us with useful interpretations should be effortlessly attracted to this complementarity and lead to fruitful cooperation. History is an indispensable element for any diplomat, both to gain the knowledge necessary to navigate increasingly complex geopolitical contexts and to help revisit the international negotiators' toolbox, ensures the contribution of the study of the history to the preparation of a young diplomat and his or her subsequent career sounds like an obvious choice, a very logical one in any successful diplomatic career. To answer these questions, each chapter contains an overview of noteworthy cases from the past and a critical analysis of events to see how they explain negotiation theory. In each case, the authors use the latest concepts developed in negotiation studies to analyze the events and to draw out lessons that can be learned. Each chapter constitutes a specific type of dialogue between history and negotiation. The appeal of negotiation can be felt in the famous words of Kennedy. The essence of ultimate decision remains impenetrable to the observer, often indeed to the decider himself. There will always be the dark and tangled structures in the decision-making process, mysterious even to those who may be most intimately involved. And the book roadmap shows that the first series of chapters discusses the sensitive issue of the parties' willingness to negotiate, i.e., how negotiations begin. With these premises in mind, the second section discusses bilateral negotiations. The third perspective looks at complex multilateral negotiations from the perspective for coalitions or organizational processes. The fourth section explores the issue of emotions and beliefs, as some international interactions cannot be explained solely in terms of the rational interests of the parties. Part 5 discusses several negotiations that took place in the Near and Middle East, including those with Iran. The book concludes with 3 international mediations that come close to negotiations. Negotiation process. As a good negotiator, it is important to have strong language skills and accurate expressions to quickly get the other side to understand what you mean and reduce communication costs. Good psychological qualities will enable you to reduce communication costs. As a good negotiator, it is important to have strong language skills and accurate expressions to quickly get the other side to understand what you mean and reduce communication costs. Good psychological qualities will enable you to deal with various complex scenarios, to become in the face of danger and to make analysis and judgments calmly. Excellent social skills are the key to being able to handle issues gently in various negotiation situations. Often being able to handle issues gently in various negotiation situations. Often negotiations are not necessarily about being aggressive, but more about achieving a win-win situation. It is important to prepare well in advance. Only by understanding the other party perspective and digging behind the information points can you avoid information errors and clarify the current situation. Secondly, learn to listen. Listen carefully to what the other side is saying and use this to uncover potential intentions and you inform the information. While clarifying the other party's points of interest, consider your own and whether there is room to combine them. Thirdly, do not reveal points of interest. Learning to change the subject and hiding your true sense of a key aspect. Now, not letting the other side know the weak points and using them to attack is something to keep in mind. Fourthly, take the initiative. Taking the initiative in a negotiation can affect the relationship between the two parties, can influence the final outcome of this negotiation. However, it is important not to be forcefully and use different tones, approaches, and other principles to facilitate the outcome. What is mean to win-win? What is means to win? What does it mean to achieve a win-win situation? Finding the other party's point of interest is the key to being clearly aware of the purpose of the negotiation. Only by being clear about the other party's motives can be facilitated the negotiation with each other and can be clearly aware of what the altruistic point of cooperation is. After all, the negotiation is not for which party wins, but for the win-win consensus and long-term benefits. Secondly, find each other communication code. Code communication and easy acceptance by the other party will reduce the cost and difficulty of our negotiations. This does not mean compromise, but we find a better way to understand each other's ideas as soon as possible. Thirdly, look for breakthrough points when you find that the other party is no longer assertive. When you find that the other party is no longer assertive or that there is a breakthrough point that will allow the stalemate to continue. That breakthrough point is crucial. How to find it and use it requires constant exploration and experimentation in different contexts.
Then let's talk about a familiar case, the Cuban Missile Crisis, which is also one of the cases in this book. First is about its background information. In June 1962, the Soviet government cooperated with Cuba to establish missiles in Cuba to counter the invasion of the US. In August, the United States obtained information about Cuban missile plan. On October 2022, US President Kennedy decided to implement a blockade of the Cuba Sea area, but the Soviet did not compromise. On October 27, a reconnaissance aircraft was shot down over Cuba by the Soviet. After that, the Cuban Missile Crisis was about to start and the negotiation process began. As for the negotiation objectives, we divided into short-term and long-term objectives. The short-term objectives is to resolve the missile crisis. Specifically, the Soviet Union dismantled Cuban missiles, and the United States dismantled Turkish missiles and did not attack Cuba. And the long-term objectives is to avoid nuclear war and ensure the safety of their own people. So how was the crisis being resolved? We think there are two kinds of things. First, the overt confrontation. Here are some examples of overt confrontation. First, the United States implemented the blockade of the Cuba Sea area. And also, the Soviet Union stated that if the United States started a war, they would give the strongest counterattack. Second, Kennedy and Khrushchev shared about 25 letters to negotiate and bargain with each other. The third example is that two reconnaissance planes were attacked by the Soviet. Second, they also conduct a secret agreement. Kennedy appointed his brother Robert Kennedy to convey a message secretly to the Soviet ambassador to the United States, stating that if the Soviet Union withdrew its missiles from Cuba, the United States promised not to invade Cuba and was determined to withdraw missiles from Turkey. That's what we think are the two kinds of things they did to resolve the crisis. Then we'd like to talk about what we learned from this case. As we learned in the class, there are three things to consider during the negotiation: people, process, planning, and decision-making. From the people's perspective, first is the US president. He has a strong negotiating attitude, but cautious, restrained, not impulsive actions. Also, he listened to the opinions of the advisors, analyzed each option rationally, and prepared carefully before the negotiation. Secondly is the team around Kennedy. The suggestion team considered history, current situation, and information they have to give policy options for the president to deal with different scenarios. From a processing perspective, we think there are three things that should be mentioned. First is the importance of communication, because frequent communication helps advance the negotiation process. Second is the importance of information. It is because the United States has obtained information about Cuban Missile Plan at an early time, so they can quickly develop policy options and prepare for the negotiation very well. Third is to focus on opportunities rather than problems. Although the Cuban Missile Crisis is a really tricky problem, the US still linked Cuba and Turkey missile events together and let them becoming bargaining chips in the negotiation. Lastly, from the planning and decision-making perspective, while planning, we should make plans for different scenarios. Whenever a new scenario arises, we can respond in time and have the bargaining chip to negotiate with our counterparts. While making decisions, we need to find the best decision since it helps you achieve your negotiation goals and reduce losses. So that's all for the Cuban Missile Crisis case. Let's turn to the next case.
Next case is about the Iran nuclear issue, 2003 to 2005. On August 4, 2003, the French, German, and British foreign minister, so-called the EU3, sent a joint letter to their Iranian counterpart, Kamal Karazi, with regard to Iran's nuclear program. Their proposal opened a time frame during which efforts on both sides were made to address the international community's concern over Iran's nuclear program without referring the matter to the United Nations Security Council. The ambition of the three European ministers stemmed from an effort to try to avoid a new international crisis. During the years from 2003 to 2004, it seems that the EU3 and its counterpart Iran had hoped for a negotiated solution. On October 21, 2003, in Tehran, the EU3 representatives, after a day of intense negotiations, agreed with Hassan Rouhani, Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council of Iran, on a declaration according to which Iran decided voluntarily to suspend all enrichment and reprocessing activities as defined by the IAEA, an international organization linked to the UN. In exchange, EU3 recognized Iran's rights to the peaceful use of nuclear energy and paved the way for long-term cooperation. Throughout 2004, difficult talks were held to agree on the terms of the Tehran Declaration, especially on the definition and scope of enrichment activities. These talks led to the Paris Agreement, signed on November 15, 2004. In the context of this agreement, Iran declared that it had no intention of developing nuclear weapons, either now or in the future, but that as a confidence-building measure, it was willing to significantly expand the scope of the suspension of activities defined as enrichment and reprocessing. Despite the result obtained in Paris after 2 days of negotiations, which clarified a number of issues that had been left open in 2003, the process progressively ground to a halt in early 2005, with each side accusing the other of breaching the terms of the freshly signed agreement.
So what can we learn from this case? Basically, there are three weaknesses that explain why this negotiation failed. Firstly, when the negotiations began, both the EU3 and the Iranians were determined to avoid a new armed conflict. This was a shared goal for the two parties. However, it was not enough. In the key issue of uranium, stakeholders don't have a shared interest. EU3 wanted to impose a total cessation of Iran's enrichment-related activities, but Iranians still want to do that. Then, what the negotiators lack is legitimacy. On the European side, the other EU member states, especially Italy and the Netherlands, were particularly outraged at the self-attributed role of EU3 because they think EU3 showed disregard for the fledgling European security and defense policy. Also, when EU3 wanted to offer Iran a section to WTO or something like that, they also lacked the legitimacy because all these offers need the back of the US. On the Iran side, Hossein Rouhani was in charge of the interdepartmental coordination in view of the negotiations at that time. But afterwards, Rouhani's position can't represent the interest of the Iranian parliament. Thirdly, the negotiating environment at the time was very unstable. As early as 2004, the proven absence of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq was a further blow to the legitimacy of the Anglo-American military intervention. The situation on the ground was rapidly deteriorating. As a result, the Iranians were feeling less inclined to negotiate. So, to conclude, between summer 2003 and summer 2005, the success of negotiations was actually possible. Iranians were intent on improving their relations with Iran, while the Iranians were aspiring to break their isolation and build a new relationship with the West. But the EU3 initiative lacked an ingredient essential to all successful negotiations. That is a minimum amount of trust. If the trust had been established from the start, it may have been possible to agree on the major bone of contention.
Let's look at the negotiating phase and the symbols. The marketing embassy to China. Firstly is the context and the motivations. The background is at the end of the 18th century, as the British demand for tea increased and the Industrial Revolution required new markets for the manufactured goods. Great Britain has become China's largest trading partner. The negotiation objective is that the British East India Company sought to increase its trade with China. Therefore, marketing was sent to meet the Qianlong, the empire of the Celestial Empire, to negotiate the business.
In ancient China, all people approaching the emperor should follow the ritual of koto, which required people to kneel 3 times with both knees on the ground and bow 3 times for each kneeling, so as to touch their forehead to the ground. But this is regarded as humiliating in the eye of the British embassy, so he issued a written proposal in line with the principle of equal status. Ultimately, it was agreed that he would only do genuflect before the emperor, as he would do before his own sovereign. Is the failure of negotiation due to the embassy's refusal to kowtow before the emperor? It could rather be the result of the Chinese tradition in foreign policy, which was incompatible with the British view. For the embassy, he was representing the most powerful nation on earth, and the best he could accept was that his sovereign and the Chinese emperor had equal status. However, in the hierarchical cultures, Son of Heaven is the one with the highest status in the whole world. The foreign countries are seen as barbarians, which should show submissive loyalty. It was also because of the cultural conflict between Confucianism and scientism. In Confucian values, authority is the most important. Hierarchy is the basic order of the universe. Social order and ceremonial behavior are the principles, while European cultural values mercantile, scientific, and industrial. The economical interest was not perceived as important as authority and stability in the eye of the Chinese emperor. As the British embassy concluded, they cannot judge China by any European standard.
Now let's look at the lessons learned from failure. Firstly, people should be more prepared before negotiation. It's necessary to fully analyze and understand the cultural background of the negotiating opponents, including customers and culture. Then we should treat cultural differences correctly. In cross-cultural negotiations, it's important to understand the value and the differences in culture of the other side. In this case, for Chinese culture, doing business and negotiating require establish friendly relationship. Such a relationship was necessary but insufficient conditions for reaching any agreement. In China, saving face is much more important than losing on the substance of the idea. So to negotiate in Chinese context is really important to engage in issues of maintaining faith and building up a self-image. So faith concerns are really important in China. The last one is the flexible negotiation strategies. The differences in the cultural background of the two sides lead to different negotiating styles. On the basis of understanding the different culture, the negotiators should make their negotiating strategies more targeted and flexible, so that their negotiating strategies adapt to more specific styles of negotiators. That's all about this part.
Lastly, let's turn to the conclusion. What can we learn from the past negotiation cases? History and diplomacy are like twins. Running through each other's lives, and negotiation is an essential element. Negotiations have four forms, which are brilliant negotiations, secret negotiations, calm negotiations, and chaotic negotiations. Some negotiators are in a strong position, but more interesting are those in a weak position. We will also see how important individual determination and organizational factors are in multilateral negotiations. Many peace treaties will be signed and ambitious conferences will fail. Also, the types of negotiations are alliances, breakdowns, and compromises. Different processes and exchanges can lead to very different results, so that's maybe the beauty of the negotiation. The revelation of negotiation in history tells us that much of the diplomacy between the parties revolves around clarity of intent, resolution of issues, clarity of responsibility, and other attempts. This suggests that not only do we have to go into the ditch with a win-win attitude of seeking common ground, we're also protecting our own interest, uncovering other potential intentions of the other side and whether there is more information available, which is all important. So negotiation is a very comprehensive matter that requires every negotiator to be on a mission. And any detail can make or break a deal. So that's all for our presentation. Thanks for your attention.